Hello and welcome to New York City Atheists Live on Tape, brought to you by New York City Atheists Incorporated. I'm your host, Dennis Horvitz, the David Letterman of the Hopelessly Damned. We're at one of our Sunday brunches, which are very popular. We always have great speakers and presentations, and that's one of the reasons why we have been on for 5 years, and we'll be going on more. So we want to ask the question, amongst others, have you ever wondered why Catholic priests are called father, nuns are called sister or mother, and the Pope is allegedly called the Holy Father of us all? It's called kin psychology, and according to our guest today, psychiatrist J. Anderson Thomson Jr. of the University of Virginia, it's one way that the Church implicitly or explicitly generates the emotional attachment of his flock. Now, I had the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Thomson for kind of a sit-down session of this show last spring at the American Atheist Convention in Atlanta. And I'll just give you a little background. Dr. Thomson has a private practice of general psychiatry and forensic psychiatry. He's going to have to explain forensic psychiatry to me because it sounds very interesting. Does this in Charlottesville, Virginia. And he serves as a staff psychiatrist at the University of Virginia Institute of Law, Psychiatry and Public Policy, and the Counseling and Psychological Services of the University of Virginia Student Health Services. He gave a talk also a couple of years ago at the Atheist Alliance International convention just outside of Washington, which I guess because it had the Four Horsemen, which included Dawkins, Hitchens, Sam Harris, and Daniel Dennett. It was kind of considered the Woodstock of atheism. In any case, he's going to be talking to us about the psychology of religion. So let me introduce Andy Thomson.
Thank you for having me. How many of you at some point in your life were religious believers? All right. Why is religion one of the central features of human nature? Why did my mind, why did your mind, why did other people's minds generate religious ideas, spread religious ideas, susceptible to believe them? And what I want to show you today is that we are tantalizingly close to a comprehensive cognitive neuroscience of religious belief. We now have answers to those questions, or a lot of answers to those questions. And what I'd like to do this morning, a couple of things, is to give you the basics of this. Start with the basics. The opening hymn will be an ode to Darwin, and then to give you the theory and to show you some of the empirical evidence. And then at the end, I'm going to close on a historical note that I think both illuminates the past and the present, but tells us something about the future. And where do we start? You start with Darwin. And why? Because Darwin's theory of natural selection, a remarkably simple theory. Can all of you see the slides with me standing here? Okay, yeah, I'm going to... Which way? All right, over here? All right. Can everybody see the slides now? Okay. Can you see the slides? All right. So, all right. Darwin's remarkable idea is the only workable explanation we have. The only workable explanation we have for the design and variety of all life on Earth. If you take Darwin's idea, combine it with Watson and Crick, genetics, you get this. This is the modern Darwinian synthesis. That every single organism, including us, is this integrated collection of problem-solving devices, adaptations, functional, that evolved over evolutionary time to enhance in some way the genes that built those adaptations. Let's just look at us. My heart solves the problem of pumping blood. Hemoglobin solves the problem of transporting oxygen. The lungs solve the problem of extracting oxygen from the air. At every single level of biological inquiry, from membranes to minds, Darwinian natural selection. But I want you to look at this statement a little bit closer, because this is also a statement about the human mind. The human mind, the mind is what the brain does, and the brain evolved under the same rules of natural and sexual selection as everything else. Okay? The brain is an integrated mind. The brain-mind is an integrated collection of problem-solving devices, adaptations, designed over evolutionary time to promote in some way the genes that built those particular adaptations. To illustrate, you're sitting there looking at me. I'm upside down on your retina in 2 dimensions, and specific adaptations in your brain convert that into a 3-dimensional image. What I'm going to show you is you also have very complex social adaptations. You're looking at my face, you're listening to the tone of my voice, and making certain conclusions from that, adaptations, most of which are unconscious. Now, Steven Pinker, I think, has a nice analogy. He thinks the mind-brain is sort of like the Apollo spacecraft, this bundled array of engineering devices solving a constant stream of problems, pulling in constant amounts of information and solving this constant stream of problems, only a few of which are conscious to the astronauts. And it is those adaptations, those social adaptations in particular, that I will show you form the basis of religious ideas. That religious ideas are utilizing these cognitive adaptations for purposes that they weren't originally designed for. But there's another basics that we have to keep in mind here, which is that we are risen apes, not fallen angels. Okay? And that we arose in Africa. Put aside our racial, ethnic differences, all of us, every one of the 6.8 billion people in this world today arose from a small band of hunter-gatherers that showed up in Africa about 50,000 years ago, 50 to 70,000 years ago. In a sense, we're an African ape. You may not know it, but this is your family history. Right here, the common ancestor with chimps and bonobos, and then the chimp-bonobo line goes up one direction. This is the hominid line. The earliest connection with a common ancestor, Australopithecines, early Homo, then our genus Homo, starting 2 million years ago, Homo erectus, Homo habilis. We're the last surviving hominid. We're the only, in a sense, intelligent designer. Some of you may have seen the announcement about Ardipithecus. If you can get your hands on a copy of that issue of Science, it's a special issue of Science, and the discovery of Ardipithecus is overturning a lot of the common wisdom. And it used to be thought that the common ancestor was somewhat chimp-like. And it turns out that Ardipithecus illustrates that the common ancestor may not have been. That Ardipithecus, 4 million years ago, was a bipedal ape with small canines, meaning very little social aggression, and the males and females were about the same size. So it looks like they had pair bonding. So it is overturning a lot of the received wisdom about human evolution. I want you to pay particular attention to the front of the skulls of this, because Lucy is on the top, Homo erectus in the middle, Homo sapiens in the bottom, and notice the area of the frontal lobes. And on the left is a Homo erectus, on the right is us, and you can see the much larger frontal lobes. This is the area of our social adaptations, which I'll show you the basis of religious beliefs. And if you remember your history, that Homo erectus left Africa almost 2 million years ago. Small bands without language, and so by 2 million years, to some extent, hominid species had conquered the physical environment. So what was the most challenging part of the environment that provided the selection pressures for the growth of these huge frontal lobes? Each other. And it is that intense social interaction that drove probably the complexity, the last stage of the complexity of our brains, and this is where the basis of religion is going to lie. What we now have I would submit to you, are robust theories with good empirical evidence that support what is termed the byproduct theory of religious belief. And that religious belief is based on the extraordinary use of everyday cognitions, particularly social cognitions, agency detection, and precautionary reasoning. And that these adaptations, which originally showed up for other purposes, combine and create religious ideas. Now, if you're wondering what a byproduct is, I notice a few people are taking notes. Reading and writing is a byproduct. It's a cultural byproduct, an incredibly useful cultural byproduct, but it's a byproduct. You don't have a reading and writing module in your brain. You use the adaptations of vision, fine motor skill, language, and it creates the extraordinary useful cultural byproduct of reading and writing. Music. Music is a byproduct of language, hard vowels and consonants set to rhythm. Probably originally the rhythm of a beating heart. And that these social cognitions create religion, and that religious ideas are really an artifact. In a sense, they're the cost we pay, to some extent, for these social cognitions. All supernatural beliefs have human minds, human capacities embedded in them, particularly these social cognitions. Now, how many of you like a Big Mac meal? How many of you crave Big Macs? Now, come on. I'm a psychiatrist, you can tell me. Come on. All right, come on. All right, let me do it another way. Let me do it another way. How many of you like a rare hamburger? All right. How many of you like French fries? All right. How many of you love a brownie? Okay? I mean, there's a brownie in the refrigerator at night and you can't go to sleep until it's eaten. Right, okay. All right, Coca-Cola. All right. What I'm going to show you is that if you understand the psychology of the Big Mac meal, you understand the psychology of religion. Oh yeah, you laugh. Let me show you. We have adaptations that arose in harsh, dangerous environments. Remember, the environments we evolved in, starvation was always right around the corner. And we have adaptations. How many of you crave broccoli? Nobody. All right, nobody. Well, there's variation in a species. You know, there are outliers. But you notice the difference in hands. And we don't crave broccoli because tubers were relatively available. They were widespread and available and probably the basis of much of our diet. But we really needed meat, protein. We all have cravings for fat, but it's the fat of lean game meat. We all have cravings for sugar, but it's originally the cravings for ripe fruit. We all have cravings for salt. These things were crucial for our survival. The modern world gives us those in abnormal, supernormal stimuli. Instead of ripe fruit, you get your brownie. Instead of lean game meat, you have your fat-rich hamburger. And that's the way you want to think about religion. It arises from these adaptations, but then comes back at us in supernormal stimuli. One of our adaptations is the attachment response. When we're distressed, we turn to an attachment figure. Religion gives us a super attachment figure. Let me now take you, the next part of the talk here, I'm just going to walk you through some of these adaptations, some of these cognitive adaptations. And the first one is decoupled cognition. Now, this is a fancy term for the following. If you look at me right now, pay close attention to what I'm saying, and think about some opinion you have on healthcare. And right now, as you're listening and watching me, think about in your head a conversation with President Obama about your view of healthcare. All of us can do it. It's an extraordinary piece of software. While you are attentively listening to me, you can imagine a complex social interaction with somebody who is not present. We take it for granted. It's crucial for memory. It's crucial for planning. As I give this talk today, all of you, even though you may be paying close attention to what I'm saying, you're going to think occasionally about who you've got to see later this afternoon or tomorrow or what's going to happen at work. And you can have these complex social interactions in your head with unseen others. And so you can see that it is just one little step to have an interaction with an ancestor, a dead ancestor. Or really just one little step further to have an interaction with a god or gods. Hyperactive agency detection. If right now there was a loud bang, all of us would startle. And we would assume that that bang, that loud noise, was from human agency until proven otherwise. Now you can see that this would be crucial for our survival. A false positive, it's just the wind, is an inconvenience. But a false negative, not jumping when there was a predator, could be deadly. So we have these hyperactive agency detection mechanisms. We will mistake a shadow for a burglar. We will never mistake a burglar for a shadow. Or those that didn't survive and leave any descendants. Many of the mechanisms in our head are actually set. These defense mechanisms are set on hair triggers because it's a sort of better safe than sorry. Now, you may ask, okay, Thomson, wait a second. Decoupled cognition, hyperactive agency detection. How do you get to the next step of supernatural beings? How do you get there? And here is really one of the crucial things that lead to religious belief. If you look at this, all of you right now fill in the lines that make this a square. But there are no lines there. It's what you know about squares that you just put in. And it's called inferential reason. We basically fill in the blanks with basic assumptions that we carry all the time. And this forms the basis of what are called minimally counterintuitive ideas. And this is the essence of religious cognition. And minimally counterintuitive worlds combine, it's sort of the optimal compromise between the interesting and the expected. And this leads things to be attention-arresting and memorable. Let me see if I can illustrate. If I tell you that one of those big trees as you enter Central Park, one of those big trees is going to do your taxes, reprogram your computer, do your laundry, call you in the morning when you need to get up, you're simply not going to believe it. There's too many violations of what you know about treeness. But if I tell you that that tree, on the night of a full moon, will hear your prayers, you're going to be, well, maybe not this crowd, but you're going to be vulnerable to believing it. Okay? And this is the essence of our religious ideas. All religious ideas. Stop for a moment and think about the Judeo-Christian God. Okay? It's basically a God. Okay? And there's a violation of physics. He's sort of everywhere, but he's still just a guy. And he can hear my thoughts, right? He knows what I'm thinking. But if he knows what I'm thinking, why do I still have to pray to him? Why do I still have to talk to him? Because all of the basic things you know about humanness are just inferred and come in. There's almost no violations of what you know about humanness, but there's just one little counterintuitive twist. This is the basic structure of all religious ideas. And again, all supernatural ideas have these templates. A counterintuitive physical property, can go through, is everywhere, can go through walls. Counterintuitive biology, a virgin birth. But think about it. Mary, virgin birth, but otherwise she's just a young woman. And everything you know about young womanhood is still in there. Counterintuitive psychology, as I said, the gods, know what I'm thinking. But still, as I said, I still have to talk to them. There are always attributes in every supernatural God. In any religion, there's always the attributes of very common human mental states. And you infer and just bring in everything you intuitively know about humanness. What I now want to show you is that, in effect, we are natural-born supernaturalists. That the vulnerability to supernatural beliefs is really the default position of our brains. And we see this particularly in children. Children are what has been referred to as common sense dualists, meaning the split between mind and body. If you take a 5-month-old, for instance, and you have them watch a box, a physical object, that moves like a human being, they'll startle. You know, it's not right. But they don't startle when you and I move as intentional, goal-directed agents. That kind of hardwiring comes with us when we're born. Unconscious, we just take it for granted, but it's very specific. So we make early on the distinction between inanimate objects and intentional, goal-directed objects. What you start to see is it's really natural to think about disembodied minds. The Deacon Doctrine, named by Daniel Lieberman, is that any powerful idea is there because it's going to fit in some way the neuroanatomy of the brain. And the more powerful the idea, the more likely it is to fit with the neuroanatomy of the brain. And I told Ken, he's seen this talk before, I told him I had some new stuff that he hadn't seen in Atlanta. So Ken, this is some of the new stuff. And what I want to show you, I think it's best illustrated by a little anatomy. This is your brain, all right? Can you hear me? Well, I'm going to yell for a minute. Okay, this is your brain, and we're going to put the superior sulcus, top of the brain. So this is dorsal. Underneath is ventral, right? Dorsal. We've got temporal lobes here. And your frontal lobes, this area right in here. So this is your brain. And we're going to do a little anatomy. So, here's the right hemisphere of your brain. This is the medial meaning along the midline, medial prefrontal cortex, this medial part of your cortex, and then the lateral is obviously outside. Lateral, dorsal, prefrontal cortex, temporal lobes. What we see is, and again, this is your right hemisphere, and we're looking at, so you're looking at my right brain, and that area on the medial side is where everything goes on that has to do with self-reference, introspection, focus on non-physical attributes of ourselves, our feelings, our wishes, our desires, emotional states, our traits, our preferences. And also in those areas where we think about other people's emotional states and their intentions, beliefs, desires. It's all along that medial part. The lateral part, particularly behind the temporal lobe, parietal lobe out here, and lateral frontal cortex, this is where we think about physicality. This is where we recognize our own face, own body movements, another person's body movements. So you see that this mind-body split is built into the very structure of the brain. This Cartesian dualism is how the brain represents mind and body, mind and physicality. And so we believe minds and bodies are separate from the very beginning, despite evidence to the contrary. It's basically built into the way we think. To understand this further, let's flip it around for a minute. Think about if you required the presence of a body to think about that person's mind. That would mean that little exercise I asked you to do in terms of interacting and thinking about Obama, for us to think about what Obama thinks requires him to be here today, you can see where that wouldn't work very well. So a belief in some form of life separate from the body and separate from what's experienced in the body is really the default setting of the human mind. The mind-brain split. And so you can see that what religion is based on is just one little step away from everyday, ordinary cognitive operation that's absolutely crucial to our being social animals. Oops, let's see. We see this again in children. 4-year-olds, more than half of 4-year-olds have imaginary friends. And it turns out the research shows that those children that have imaginary friends actually are more social, and in some sense do better. And then there's a fellow, Jesse Baring, who's done some just wonderful research. And I would strongly suggest looking at his article in American Scientist on this. I think it's June of 2006. I think what you want to keep your eye on, he has a book coming out, I think, this spring on religion, which I think will be tremendous. And he's done some incredible research, and one of them is the alligator and the mouse. And what this is he takes, and he tells the children, this is just a game, it's not serious, just a game, and he takes a grouchy alligator who eats a mouse puppet. It's a puppet show, and the grouchy alligator eats the mouse, and then he asks the children all sorts of questions. And he asks them, you know, does the mouse still taste his food from lunch? No. Does the mouse still need water? No. Does the mouse miss its mother? Oh yeah. Is the mouse still angry at his brother? Oh yeah. So you start to see that children make this split. And what's important about this is that the idea that we have to sort of learn culturally about the afterlife or those kind of beliefs is simply wrong, that actually children are more vulnerable to it. As children get a little bit older, they get a little bit more sophisticated in this, so that they'll no longer say that a mouse is thirsty, they don't need water, and they no longer have the thirst, whereas young children